In spite of the title, this video isn't a philosophical discussion. It's about making decisions. A powerful feature of PHP is its ability to perform different actions depending on the outcome of a condition. The condition must be either true or false. PHP isn't capable of understanding such subtleties as maybe. In computing terminology, true and false are known as booleans. They're named for George Boole. He was a 19th century English mathematician who developed what's known as Boolean algebra, which uses two values, 0 for false and 1 for true. This laid the foundations for the ones and zeros that underpin modern computer logic. In PHP, booleans can be either explicit or implicit. First, let's take a look at explicit booleans. There are just two of them, the keywords true and false. These keywords are case insensitive, so you can spell them all uppercase. You can even use a crazy mixture of uppercase and lowercase, although it's not a good idea. But, and this is vitally important, you must not enclose these keywords in quotes. In addition to the explicit Boolean keywords true and false, PHP supports the concept of implicit Booleans. Sometimes you'll hear these referred to as truthy and falsy values. The following values are regarded as false in PHP. 0 as a number or enclosed in quotes. An empty string, in other words, single or double quotes with no space in between. An empty array. The special data type null, which is also a case-insensitive keyword. Null means no value in the sense that the value doesn't exist. As a result, variables that don't exist or that have been unset are also treated as false. However, trying to use an unset variable will normally generate a warning notice, so it's not a good idea to use one in a condition. A simple XML object created from empty tags is also regarded as implicitly false. Simple XML is beyond the scope of this course, so you can ignore it at this stage. Everything else is true. Even -1 is true. So here comes a PHP paradox that frequently trips up beginners. It looks as though OK has been set to false. Wrong. It's true, because false is in quotes, so it's a string. Only an empty string with nothing between the quotes is false. As a string, false between quotes is implicitly true. Decision-making in PHP can also be controlled by comparing two non-Boolean values. For example, whether one number is greater than, equal to, or less than another. This also produces true or false. And based on whether something is true or false, different code can run. The rest of this chapter explores how to use this branching logic in PHP. Let's take a look at how PHP scripts make decisions based on conditions and comparisons. The structure of a conditional statement is based on human language. You wrap the condition to be tested in a pair of parentheses and precede it with the keyword if. If the condition evaluates to true, the code between the curly braces is executed. If it evaluates to false, the whole block of code is ignored. If you want something else to happen when the condition fails, add the keyword else after the closing curly brace and wrap the alternative code in another pair of curly braces. So if the condition is true, the first block of code is executed, and if the condition is false, the second block is executed instead. But you're not limited to just two options. You can chain conditions like this using else if, which is normally written as one word. It still works if you add a space between else and if, but else if as a single keyword is more usual. When you chain conditions like this, only the first one that evaluates to true is executed. So if the first condition is false, but the second one is true, the code inside the second pair of curly braces is executed. But if both are true, only the first block is executed. Much of the time, conditions involve comparing two non-Boolean values using one of these comparison operators. One of the most important points to note is that PHP uses two equal signs to test whether both values are equal. A common mistake is to use just one, which always evaluates to true. Why, you may ask? Well, it's because a single equals sign assigns a value. It doesn't compare two values, and if it succeeds in assigning the value, it's an implicit true. The difference between equal and identical refers to the data type. For example, if you're comparing two variables that contain the same value, they're equal. But let's say they both contain the number 42, one of them in quotes, the other not. The one in quotes is a string, so it's not the same data type as the one without quotes, even though they contain the same value, so they're not identical. It's a subtle difference that you probably won't need to worry about in the early stages of working with PHP, but you do need to be aware of it. Another message to take away from this table is that the exclamation mark is used to mean not. The comparison operators in the third column are straightforward. They test whether one value is less than or equal to, greater than, and greater than or equal to another. Let's put that into practice with comparison.php, which is in the chapter 3, 03_02 folder of the exercise files. The file begins by assigning Arthur Dent to name. Then there's a series of conditional statements using if, else if, and else, and a different string is displayed depending on the value of name. So if we load this into a browser, it displays I could never get the hang of Thursdays. Name is Arthur Dent. That equates to true in the first condition, so the first block of code is executed. But let's say I misspell Arthur Dent. Let's change that to a lowercase a and save and reload the page in the browser. This time we get, is that really a piece of fairy cake? That's the default, which is in the else block at the bottom. Arthur Dent doesn't match, even though it looks the same. PHP is case sensitive, so that lowercase a in name doesn't match here. Obviously it doesn't match Marvin, so we get the default. But let's see what happens if we make that common mistake of using just one equal sign for comparison. So on line 6, I'm going to delete one of those equal signs, so name just equals Marvin. If we save that and then reload the page in the browser, we get Marvin's constant complaint about the pain in his diodes. And the reason that that has happened is obviously this first condition isn't true, but this second condition, we're assigning Marvin to name, and that succeeds, so it will always be true. So you must always check that you're using two equal signs when comparing values for equality. One equal sign assigns a value, two equal signs compare. So let's put that second equal sign in there. So far, we've tested only one condition in each block, but very often you need to test more than one, and you do that with logical operators. The three most important logical operators are listed here. The first two are used for multiple conditions. When placed between two conditions, two ampersands means and. Both conditions need to be true. Two vertical pipes mean or. Only one of them needs to be true. The last logical operator, the exclamation mark, is used with a single variable or expression. Placing it immediately in front of a variable reverses its Boolean value. So if A is true, preceding it with an exclamation mark converts it to false, and vice versa. So let's get back to the code. We'll start off by correcting the spelling of Arthur Dent's name. That needs to be an uppercase A. And then we'll add another variable on the next line called day, and we'll set its value to Thursday. Then in the first condition, we'll check that both the name is Arthur Dent and that day is equal to Thursday, so two equal signs there. So if we save that and then refresh this in the browser, I could never get the hang of Thursdays because both Arthur Dent matches name and day equals Thursday, so that works fine. But let's change day to Wednesday, and then in the second conditional statement, after Marvin, we'll have two vertical pipes, that's the OR operator, and we'll check whether day is equal to Wednesday. And then if we save that and reload the page in the browser, there is Marvin complaining again. So what has happened here is that we've got name is Arthur Dent, the day is Wednesday. Both of these need to match. Only the first one evaluates to true, the second one is false, so this completely fails. Then in the else if, name isn't equal to Marvin, but day is equal to Wednesday, and this is the OR operator, so only one of these needs to evaluate to true. It has evaluated to true, so this second block of code has been executed. So that's the basic decision-making process in PHP. It's based on control structures using if, else if, and else. One or more conditions placed between parentheses are evaluated, and the code is executed in the block that follows the first whole condition that equates to true. These simple examples have used just one line of code in each block, but often there are many more. In the previous video, we saw how different code can be executed depending on whether a condition is true or not. Each condition is enclosed in parentheses, and the block of code associated with it is surrounded by curly braces. So if the first condition between the parentheses on line 5 evaluates to true, the code between the first pair of curly braces is executed. If the first condition fails, but the second condition between the parentheses on line 7 is true, then the block of code in the next pair of curly braces is executed instead. And if all previous conditions fail, the code in the else block at the end is executed. This is the most common way of building a series of conditional statements, using if, else if, and else. However, there is an alternative syntax that eliminates the use of curly braces. Let's adapt this existing script to use the alternative syntax. The basic control structure remains the same. The first condition is introduced by if. It's between parentheses, but instead of curly brace here, we replace that with a colon. Curly braces need to be in pairs, so we also need to get rid of the curly brace before else if. And if we're using this alternative structure, we need to use it all the way through the same series. So we need to replace the next curly brace with another colon, and then remove the curly brace before else. We follow else, also with a colon, and then right at the end we need to deal with the last curly brace. We get rid of that and replace it with the keyword end if, which is all one word, and then we follow that with a semicolon. So if we save that page and then load it into a browser, it works exactly the same as the other syntax. However, there is one important difference. When you use curly braces around each conditional block, else if can be broken into two words, but with this alternative syntax, else if must be written as a single word. Let's see what happens if we break else if into two words. And if we save that and then load it into a browser, we get a parse error, an unexpected if. So we need to make sure that else if we're using this alternative structure, is always spelled as one word. And similarly, end if cannot be broken. If we break that, and then we save it and reload the page, we also get a syntax error, an unexpected if. So both else if and end if must be spelled as one word if you're using this alternative structure. So that is the alternative syntax for control structures using if, else if, and else. Instead of wrapping each conditional block in curly braces, you introduce each block with a colon. In this case, we've got 3 conditional blocks, but you can have any number of else if blocks in the middle or none at all. The structure always ends with end if, followed by a semicolon. If you decide to use this syntax, all of the conditions in the same chain must use it, and although it's more common to enclose each conditional block of code in curly braces, using this syntax can improve readability. Loops also use curly braces, but the end if keyword is clearly recognizable and unambiguous. So this syntax can also be useful when the conditional blocks contain a lot of HTML code. A switch statement offers another way to execute different code depending on a condition. Before looking at real code, let's take a look at the basic structure of a switch statement. It consists of the keyword switch followed by a pair of parentheses containing the value you want to test. The body of the switch statement goes between a pair of curly braces. Inside the braces, the case keyword precedes the value that you want to match, and the value is followed by a colon. If the value passed to the switch statement matches, any code that follows is executed. In effect, this is the same as a conditional statement using if and testing whether var equals value 1, and on its own, it's a rather cumbersome approach. But you can test for multiple values by adding break at the end of each case and repeating the pattern. At the end of the switch block, you can add default followed by a colon, and any code that you want executed if none of the values match. Default has the same meaning as the else block at the end of a conditional statement. You can also stack alternative cases like this, so the code preceding the second break will be executed if var matches either value 2 or value 3. The effect is exactly the same as this control structure using if, else if, and else. There's no particular advantage in using one over the other, but a switch statement can be easier to read and maintain if you need to test for many options. So let's take a look at switch statements in action. This is switch_01.php, which you can find in the chapter 3, 03_04 folder of the exercise files. Line 2 defines a variable called name, and then name is passed to the switch statement that begins on line 4. And the statement displays different strings depending on the value of name. The first string is displayed, it's compared only against one case, Arthur Dent. The second string is displayed if any of the following three cases match, Marvin, Paranoid Android, or Robot, and if nothing matches, then the default is displayed. So if we load this into a browser, it displays I could never get the hang of Thursdays, name is Arthur Dent, that matches the first case. We echo I could never get the hang of Thursdays and then break out of the switch statement, so everything else is ignored. So let's try this with a different value for name. We'll have robot, save, and then reload the page in the browser. And now we're getting Marvin complaining about the terrible pain in his diodes. Didn't match Arthur Dent, didn't match Marvin or Paranoid Android, but it did match Robot. We echo and then we break. So if we try that with a different value, say Marvin, and then reload, we get that same terrible pain in the diodes because we're matching against this case. So we're still displaying the second string. But if we change name to a value that isn't in the switch statement, say Zaphod, and reload, then that default is that really a piece of fairy cake is displayed. Let's go back to the original name, which was Arthur Dent. And I want to show you what happens if you forget to use break. So I'm going to comment out break on line 7 and also on line 12. Save and then reload the page in the browser. And all three strings are displayed. What's happened here is we've matched Arthur Dent. We echo that. There is no break, so we just continue on executing all the code. Even though Marvin, Paranoid, Android, and Robot don't match, we echo that, and then we echo the last default statement. So it's extremely important to remember to use break to keep the different parts of the switch statement separate. Now, although this is a trivial example of a switch statement, it does illustrate some important points. Each case is matching only a single value. Unlike the examples earlier in this chapter, we can't check both the day of the week and the value of name at the same time. So a switch statement doesn't have the equivalent of the AND operator, but it does have the equivalent of the OR operator because these three cases that we've got here, Marvin, Paranoid, Android, and Robot, they are alternatives that we can use. So it's the equivalent of the OR operator. The value that follows the case keyword must be a simple data type, such as a number, string, or a boolean. You can use comparison operators in a switch statement, but you need to be careful. Let's take a look at this other file, switch_02.php, which is also in the exercise files for this video. It uses a switch statement to calculate whether to add a delivery charge to the total. But if we test this in a browser, we get this syntax error, an unexpected less than symbol on line 6. So here on line 6, that's where we're using the less than symbol. Although we're passing total to the switch statement, we can't just say less than 50. What we need to do is to have a complete expression. We need to say case total is less than 50, and the same with each of the cases. We always need to have the complete comparison, and then this will create a boolean which will either be true or false. So if we save that and reload the page in the browser, we now get that the total including delivery is 60.99. So what we've done is we've looked at the total. It's 55.99. It's not less than 50, so we've gone through to the next one. It is less than 100, so it's worked out the total including delivery is delivery divided by 2, and we're also using this combined operator here. We'll be dealing with those in the next chapter when we look at doing calculations with PHP. So let's see what happens if we change this to 155.99, save that and reload. And this time we get the total, free delivery, and it's the same value, 155.99, because all we're doing is we're displaying total, free delivery, and the value of total. So that's how you use a switch statement. It matches a simple value, such as a string, number, or boolean, and then executes the remaining code, either until it comes to a break statement or until it gets to the final curly brace. The most common error with switch statements is forgetting to add break at the end of a block of code. As with all conditional control structures in PHP, you need to make sure the conditions are in a logical order. Only the first condition that evaluates to true will be used. All the others will be ignored, even if they're also true.